Ad Vitam is a French series that can be found on Netflix. The title, which is Latin, roughly translates as For Life. As of when this video is being uploaded, there is only one season, made up of 6 episodes with an average episode length of around 50 minutes. The main premise of the show is as follows. In an age of medical technology that allows people to live forever young, a cop and a rebellious 20-something investigate a mass suicide of 7 teenagers. Let me just say that right off the bat, this was one of my favorite shows I've seen in a while, and it was a really nice surprise for me because I went into it with little to no expectations. For those of you new to the channel, let me just quickly break down how this video is going to be structured. First, I will give my spoiler-free review of the show, and afterwards I will go into a little bit deeper of an analysis, which will contain spoilers. The main theme of Ad Vitam is the exploration of the question, what effect would the ability to live forever have on what it means to be human? And also, how would that effect extend into our society, culture, and relationships? The show's exploration is done in such a way that encourages us, the audience, to explore these various questions on our own. This style used for constructing thematic elements mirrors the style used for the world building as well. Instead of coming out and directly explaining all of the laws, social norms, and cultural attributes this imagined future society holds, the audience is made aware of them indirectly in small doses as part of a gradual immersion running parallel with the plot progression. This method of world building is one that I personally much prefer. It lets you find out all of this information on your own, piecing together how this world operates and how its structure affects the people that live within it. This style of gradual build-up used for both the diegetic space and thematic elements is represented and accentuated by the plot arc itself. The whole show is based around a police investigation, and just as the plot moves forward and Darius and Krista get closer and go deeper into the truth, the audience is also encouraged to perform their own investigation of the world this show constructs. This is the reason why, apart from the synopsis I read for you at the beginning, I'm choosing not to explain too much about the world of Ad Vitam and how it works to you in this review, at least in this spoiler-free portion. Because the whole beauty of this show's design lies within the experience of finding and collecting all the clues it gives you and coming to your own conclusions. That being said, I just want to stop and also take a moment to acknowledge how absolutely beautiful looking this show is. I mean, right from the first episode, shot for shot, it's just gorgeous. I'll get into this more deeply in my analysis, but don't for 1 second think that this show is just trying to look good just to show off or seem artsy. There is a very purposeful design to its stylization, and all of the choices made are serving to advance the plot and convey its thematic elements. Perhaps the most easily identified example, and again, I'm not going to give it away in this spoiler-free part of the video, but for everyone who has not seen this show and is planning on watching it, here's a nice starting point. Pay attention to the use of color, specifically red and blue, as they appear in the show. What do you think each of these colors represent? This is just one example of the show mirroring the police investigation that moves the plot forward with its challenge to the audience to conduct their own investigation of its commentary and the questions it raises. The soundtrack for this show is incredible in my opinion. It's made up of these electronic, atmospheric beats and club songs, and each one seems to fit so well within the context that they are used. It really helps to give off this dark, futuristic, dystopian vibe, which is basically the overall tone of the show. The acting is solid. I mean, I gotta admit, as a former film student, any actor speaking French just sounds eloquent and profound to me, so I guess I'm kinda biased. To be fair, nobody was exactly blowing my mind. But on the other hand, everyone played their parts, with the actors for Darius and Krista both appropriately stepping up their performances to match their protagonist status. The dude who played Virgil was also pretty good too. Alright, so let's get down to the bottom line. Is this show for you? If you're looking for a futuristic sci-fi dystopian examination of humanity packaged within a crime drama mystery, this could definitely be the show for you. That being said, here's something I just want to emphasize again. This show is going to require some effort from you. It calls upon you to be an active viewer that's willing to connect a lot of the dots on your own. If you're just looking for a show where you don't need to think too much about what's going on or what everything means, and prefer to have everything explained to you directly, then this might not be the show for you. If, on the other hand, you thoroughly enjoy this process, then this should be a sufficient fix. This is also a perfect show to watch while you're high. It's pretty tripped out and surreal at times, and although I myself no longer partake in the recreational use of controlled substances, I can guarantee that this show will not disappoint while under the influence. This is the kind of show that very much gives you that sense of going down the rabbit hole, as each episode takes you closer and closer to a very dark and disturbing truth. And in that sense, this show reminded me a bit of True Detective Season 1. Now hold up. I'm not saying this show is as good as True Detective. My comparison here is the sense of foreboding and existential dread, a story that leads to a very dark place that makes you feel uneasy about humanity. There are similar narrative elements used to achieve this as well. Police investigation, dark truths that have been covered up, and that originate on a far larger scale than first anticipated. Anyways, I'll just leave you guys with that final vote of confidence. Vitam is a solid show and does a good job of building and then immersing you in its depiction of a dystopian future, while at the same time, as is often the case in dystopian works, provoking consideration of how this imagined future might reflect and relate to real life, and perhaps our actual future. Alright, so that's going to do it for the spoiler-free review. If you've already seen this show or you just don't care about spoilers, stick around for my analysis and further thoughts on the show. If you haven't seen it yet and you don't want spoilers, go watch it and then feel free to come back afterwards and watch the rest of the video. With that being said, let's get into this analysis. As I mentioned before, red and blue in Vitam are used as visual signals of its thematic points. I'm pretty sure even if you've never learned or been trained in film analysis, you probably still notice this emphasis on both colors. The association or symbolic significance each color has in the show is the jumping off point for pretty much all the rest of its social and existential commentary. And so it's no wonder that it's made the most obvious to the viewers. I'd be willing to bet that most of you that are watching this, that have seen the show, already have a pretty good idea of what these two colors represent. But let's just spell it out for the sake of establishing a foundation for further analysis. Blue represents eternal life, the society made up of those who partake in the regeneration process, and therefore never age. On the other side is red, which represents youth, the minority in this new society that are supposedly becoming obsolete in the eyes of the ageless majority. You can see these two sides identified by their colors throughout the show, whether it be a character, location, or an object. The show does a really good job of using these colors in a way that, although at times is a bit upfront and in your face, still remains aesthetically pleasing and never seems unrealistic in the context of the futuristic dystopian atmosphere. There are also many cases in which these colors appear together in the same space, either contrasting each other or being mixed together. For example, the mourner who is seen in the first episode and his sphere. And once again, the mixing of these two colors is used to show either the symbolic complexity of a given location, the interaction between two characters of opposing sides, or even the internal conflict within one character. I have to admit that I went and found out the exact symbolic meaning for these colors straight from the creator and the director of the show himself, Thomas Cayley, who pretty much spelled it out in a Q&A video, which I will link in the description of this video. So another cool point which came up in this Q&A, and that I had kind of got a sense of on my own before seeing it, was also the association of temperature with each of these colors. Red is a warm color, while blue is a cold color. This ties in nicely with the coldness of immortality, of life extended beyond the natural limits, and the warmth of natural life and of youth. So it's kind of like dead bodies are cold and young, alive bodies are still warm with life. Why is this sounding so weird when I'm saying it? This brings me to one of the more interesting paradoxes within these two sides, blue and red, eternal life and youth. While those who take part in regeneration appear to have conquered death and are obsessed with staying alive, their extension of life beyond its natural limits has actually devalued what it means to be alive, and in doing so they are bringing a slow death upon human existence itself. There are references made by the youth in the show calling the adults ghosts, because they are no longer alive and perhaps no longer human. On the other hand, the youth are actually the most alive of anyone else, as they are young and have no experience of life other than a natural state of being unaffected by regeneration. And yet, they are the ones most accepting of death and its significance. They do not run from it, but rather embrace it as a part of human nature itself. So, to sum this up, the blue side tries to distance itself from death, but in the process loses what it means to be truly alive, while the red embrace death, but in doing so are the ones that are the most alive. This duality of blue and red is most prominently on display when thinking of the two main protagonists, Darius and Krista. Darius represents the blue side of eternal life, while Krista represents the red side of youth. This duality is also established in the show in a really cool way in one of the first scenes, where the police go to visit the mother of one of the kids that was found dead on the beach to inform her that her son has died. This is of course mirrored at the end of the show with another mother who is pregnant, Darius' wife. But anyways, so along with the police there is a guy known as a mourner that shows up. And he's got this cool little sphere. It constantly changes back and forth from red to blue, blue to red. And I just think it's a really great way to set up the two opposing sides of the show right off the bat. The mourner's job is to help people cope with death, and as we see, this is the same issue that divides and separates these two sides throughout the show, and their different ways of dealing with death. Blue runs from it, while red embraces it. This paradoxical nature within the two sides is also present within their desires and motivations. Those that regenerate appear to be all about preserving their life and keeping it the same, but as a result of this, their lives lose meaning and their experience of life becomes unbearably empty, and so they have to get their fix through various substitutes for the passage of time, displayed through death, mortality, and finality. This is why they seek NDEs, or near-death experiences, in the form of drugs or the fighting arenas, and of course, ultimately, the rapid aging process they inflict upon the captured miners. On the other hand, the youth, while being so concerned with embracing death and mortality, are at the same time trying to preserve a way of life, a natural existence. And this is shown in the decision Krista makes in the end to take her friends and go off to an island to live life free of regeneration, to preserve mortality and the natural process. You can also see this foreshadowed with Darius' wife's work in preserving natural habitats, keeping alive nature's process of the life and death cycle. It also ties in with her having a baby, which mirrors this space of natural preservation of new life. It's always been there, the gap between generations, and the many ways in which the older generation and younger generation are unable to relate despite existing in the same world. Taste in music, political belief, fashion, philosophy on life, etc. This show takes the age gap and its ontological and sociological significance and imagines a world in which that gap is expanded indefinitely. In Vitam, the differences between the youth and adults are not only psychological but biological in nature. At one point in the show, Krista mentions her feeling that her parents no longer seem to be of the same species as her, that their regeneration has turned them into something inhuman. The considerably larger and more unsettling age gap in Ad Vitam can be a lens to look at and think about our own culture and the separation between youth and the older generation, even though in the dystopian future of Ad Vitam, this separation is exaggerated quite a bit. No commentary on life and death and existence is complete without some good old religion thrown in. In the show, the main manifestation of religion takes the form of the Church of Glorification. All members believe that regeneration is wrong, and to live a natural and pure life, one must accept and embrace death. Here, religion or faith finds a very close association with nature, which is interesting to think about in comparison to real-life Christianity, where there is often a promise of an afterlife or life beyond death. In the Church of Glorification, however, death and its finality seem to be what is most holy and sacred. People who regenerate are trying to break the natural law of things, the natural order, as if they are rejecting God's plan for his creations, and in doing so are trying to play gods themselves. There is also an association of purity, that life without regeneration is pure, while extending life is impure. This concept of purity is of course also very much present in actual religion outside of the show. So let's stay with this idea of purity. As any English major undoubtedly has heard a million times, a tried and true symbol of purity and cleansing throughout time has always been water. So let's talk about water. First, let's look at the jellyfish, which is obviously a huge symbol used in the show. It becomes this metaphor for eternal life in this imaginary society, and it is based on a jellyfish that actually does exist. But of course, as immortal as these jellyfish supposedly are, without water, they actually aren't at all. Think about the guy who's dressed as a jellyfish that you see in the first episode in the very first scenes of the show. He's seen out of water as a jellyfish falling down and also observing the washed up bodies on the shore. Also, that scene early on in the show where Krista takes her parents' pet jellyfish and throws it on the table where it promptly dies. This is of course also a hugely symbolic scene in the show. Then of course there are the washed up bodies themselves that appear on the beach, from the sea, from water onto land. Then think about the regeneration process itself. It involves lying in a box with water in it, which by the way looks very much like a coffin, right? And the process that takes place for regeneration also very much could represent a kind of baptism or rebirth. So just like the jellyfish themselves, the people of the blue side of regeneration need water to extend their lives, to be reborn in their own way. Also, let's just throw in the fact that the very first time we see Krista in the show, she is coming out of a pool filled with water. But seriously, this is just another example of how meticulous this show's design is, as this emergence from water foreshadows her eventual imprisonment and emergence from the water tanks on display for the audience at the museum at the end of the show. The tanks themselves are also worth talking about, as they are also a kind of coffin, and the process those kids go through of the rapid aging is also kind of this sick baptism and funeral all in one. Alright, so the true irony in the show and lesson for all of us to learn is that children and the next generation are what make the world move forward. When I say irony, I'm talking about the fact that this society has gone to such great lengths to further technology and science to find a way to extend life, and to therefore be reborn anytime they want with regeneration, when in actuality, children are the true source of rebirth for humanity. That scene in the museum where that dude says, yeah, children are no longer necessary, no longer needed, or whatever he says, pretty much sums it up perfectly. This guy trying to say the kids are no longer necessary, when in fact we find out later on he has a huge role in the evil and disturbing ritual of taking kids and making them rapidly age for entertainment and to feed the emptiness inside him and everyone else like him, becomes an example of this hypocrisy within the blue side of regeneration and eternal life. In the end, these adults who claim they no longer need children, still in a much sicker and more twisted way, find a way to use them and to need them to feel alive. This is also explained during Darius's flashback scene about his son, and how even though he was one of the first to use and get the treatment of regeneration, which I think saves him from a disease that he had, which was gonna kill him, he finds it completely pointless if he can't have his son with him. And this is what ultimately leads him to become the man he is, depressed and empty inside, like so many others. Without a new generation to pass everything onto to challenge and reinvent society, the human race would become stagnant and stand still in time and quality of life. And we see examples of this in the show time and time again. I was looking over the Reddit thread about this show and saw someone mentioning how, for such a supposedly advanced and futuristic society, they still had regular cars and buildings that didn't look any different from what we have today. And that kind of made the show seem less realistic to him. Someone else responded to him saying that because of the stagnation from regeneration, perhaps many of the things in society that would have been advanced, like cars and such, would also have gone stagnant, and that this may have been a creative choice to show this stagnation in society. Or maybe they just didn't have enough in the budget. I'd be interested to know what the actual truth is behind that. Alright, I wasn't going to mention this, but I just feel like I have to stick it in here because it just annoyed me. So in the first minute of the first episode, there's this news report montage from all over the world, and in the subtitles, it says that one of the news reporters is speaking Chinese, but they're clearly speaking Korean. Like, come on, guys. That's not Chinese. I watch my K-dramas. I think I know Korean when I hear it. Alright, that's gonna do it for my analysis and review of Ad Vitam. Hope you guys found it somewhat interesting. If you're like me and you enjoyed this show and think it deserves more recognition, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. And of course, subscribe for more videos. Check out my other reviews if you're looking for shows to watch. This is TwoTenEast. I'll catch you guys next time. I'm out.